Today we're going to talk about how to prepare for a job interview in English. First of all, the application process is divided into several sections, right? So we've got the application process, we've got scheduling the interview, we've got the interview itself. Usually there's a follow-up interview, which we also call a technical one. So that's where you actually have an interview with a specialist. That's usually on the team that you're going to be working with. And after that comes the selection process, followed by the employment procedure. So this process, the whole process, varies from one work field to another. All right. So today we're going to look at job interviews, the general ones specifically. Those are the ones that actually cover a broader spectrum. Okay. First things first, the place where the job is, well, not the place, the advert of the job, the open position, that vacancy that is actually put out there to attract candidates, that is called a job post. All right, so we refer to it as a job post in English. And when it comes to interviews, right, they do vary from one field to another, but there are a few questions that are recurring. They keep on coming over and over and over again, regardless of the field that you work in. So those are the questions that we're going to look into today. Now it's very important to actually take this and look back at your work experience and take what is relevant out of it, okay? Because this will vary from person to person. Now, the most important thing is for you to figure out what you actually want to say on the job interview. So we're going to look at it from a strategic perspective, and then you take that and you start building your English around it, all right? Because when we talk about business English, it is huge. There's so many things you can learn in business English, and prepping for an interview is just a small section, all right? Learning business English is fantastic if you're going to have an office job. Okay, if you're going to be dealing with clients, if you're going to be giving presentations or talks or something along those lines, right? So we're not looking at physical jobs, for example. There are other categories though. In English, we have categories like, for example, English for specific purposes. So if you actually want it for a specific purpose, you can look into those categories and see if something is adequate for you. But business English covers quite a wide spectrum, and prepping for an interview is just a small corner of the whole thing. So if you do have an interview coming up, the best thing to do is to tackle the questions and to tackle your experience, and then figure out how you actually want to phrase that in English and polish it, right? So remember that the key here is to obviously figure out what you want to say, but to practice on a frequent basis, all right? And you have to practice out loud, okay? Not just in your head. You have to practice out loud, get the words out there, get it flowing, and see what happens. And keep improving it, all right? It's probably not going to sound the best the first time. So you might as well practice a little bit. But if you've got a plan beforehand, it will make your interview just that much better. Okay? Now, there are some common questions that interviewers ask. Number one, you are the candidate. Okay? You're not the interviewer. You are the candidate. And the first question that tends to be asked is quite a general question, honestly. Tell me about yourself and your background. So that's the first question that interviewers tend to ask a candidate, all right, in a general interview. Now, here we want to aim for under 5 minutes. Your monologue should be under 5 minutes. We don't want to go overboard, right? So if you're a talkative person, you want to figure out how to make your speech a little bit more concise. What we're looking for here is precision. Remember that you already submitted your CV. So what you're going to say is obviously you're going to touch on what's on the CV, but ideally you would add value to what's on that paper, okay? So you'd go into a little bit more depth. You want to share your work journey. You can mention the experience you built up, the things that would help you do this job better, the one that you're applying for. All right. So in order to know that, you're going to have to carefully read your role and the job description. Okay. So know exactly what they're asking for so that you can take that and work with it. All right. It's very important to do that beforehand. So now that you know what your role is going to be, what is being asked from you, you look at your work experience, your whole journey, and say, okay, well, this is what I did, and this is what is relevant. The relevant stuff has to shine a lot more than the irrelevant stuff that you've done. All right, because sometimes our careers do not look very linear. So if you worked as a cashier at some point, for example, and it's not really relevant to the job that you're applying for, it's okay to mention it. But if there's something else that really shines, we want to emphasize that. We want to put the spotlight there, right? So remember that relevance is very, very important. This is why you need to read your role and that description in depth. All right. So that's the first thing we do. You want to look at your journey and fish out the elements that really make your journey relevant to the job post you're applying for. Okay. Now, you can talk about your passions and your hobbies. All right. Over here. But again, we want to look into keeping it relevant. All right. So you don't want to start talking about how you watch TV every evening. Nobody cares about that. What we do want to do is if you are going to talk about your passions and your hobbies, you want to look into the ones that actually helped you build skills that can help you at that job, even if they're not direct, right? If there's not a direct correlation, but if there is a hobby that you actually that helped you develop a certain skill that can be somewhat beneficial at that job, you can mention it. It's a bonus point, all right? Now, remember that under passions and hobbies, we also have many different things, and language learning is one of them, all right? So if you are learning languages, definitely talk about that here too, especially if you are good at those languages, all right? So remember that when it comes to our passions and hobbies, we want to only mention the relevant things because an interviewer is genuinely not interested in what you do in your spare time. The more you say, sometimes, sometimes it just makes everything worse. So let's keep it short, concise, but very efficient and strategic. That's what we're looking for over here. All right. So that's what you're going to do. You're going to look at your CV, your work journey, and if you want your passions and hobbies, what we're going to fish out the very relevant things that can benefit, well, basically the odds of you getting that job. All right. Now, another common question that we get on interviews is what sets you apart from other candidates? All right. So obviously you're not the only candidate applying for that job. What sets you apart from them? What makes you special? Now, we're going to dig deeper into ourselves and what we've done. Here is where you want to highlight your top strengths, okay, what you're really, really good at, and ensure that you relate them back to your role, okay? If they're not relevant to your role, that is not fantastic. We want to relate them back to your role, okay? So if you are good at managing, for example, and you've got experience in managing, you're applying to become a project manager, we want to talk about that management if that is one of your strengths. Okay, so look into your strengths. Now we're going to look into our skill set. What are you genuinely good at that someone else might not have? So the more unique you can keep it, the better. All right. But remember that it has to be relevant to the job that you're applying to. Now, that's one thing. Another thing to talk about if you feel like you've gone a little bit short, we can talk about how we built those skills. All right. So, how you built those strengths that you've got. Let's say, for example, you're really good at at speaking English, or you're really good at giving presentations, you're really good at speeches, you're really good at, for example, taking client requests, whatever it is you're good at, you want to take that and say, okay, well, this is how I built this skill. This is an optional part, but it is nice, it is interesting, as long as you can keep it concise, right? So if you can keep it sweet and short, that's good. If you're going to blab about it for a very long period of time, then maybe we can just omit it altogether. All right. It does obviously depend on the the work interview itself. Okay. So the environment you find yourself in. Now, we look at our top strengths and we discuss those unique parts that can actually make us shine compared to other candidates that might be applying for the same position. Because remember that the job description, all of the candidates look at that job description. All of the candidates that apply should somewhat fall under those categories, right? Should have those requirements. So, other than those requirements, what do you have to add? What more value can you give? That's what we want to really highlight in this section, right? So, if you have done extensive research about the company itself, you can also bring that in here, because the more you know about the company you're applying for, the better. The better the impression you give them, at least. All right? So, if you have done your research, you can talk about it there too. But what we really want to shine in this section are our unique strengths. Okay? So I don't want you to go over your background again, just like in the previous section, because many people think those two questions are the same. We're not looking for a repetition of your work journey. We're looking for the specific skills that make you a very valuable candidate. All right? That's what we're looking for in this section. Now, sometimes, well, many times, during job interviews, you get questions that are a little bit tricky to tackle because they can have negative connotations, all right? Or you can just directly lead down the wrong road. Now, one of those questions is related to deadlines, okay? So if you have a deadline, you need to meet those deadlines. Sometimes, not always. This is not one of, let's say this is one of the questions that actually comes up sparingly, okay? So it doesn't come up in every single interview, but it does come up and you might want to prepare for it. It depends on your field again, all right? Now, if you couldn't meet a deadline, what would you do? That is a question. Or another variation of that question, tell me about a time, so something that actually happened, when you couldn't meet a deadline and how you decided to handle that situation. All right, so we're looking back, the interview is asking you about how you handled something like that in the past in order to assess how you're going to handle it in the future, right? When you actually get the job. Now, discussing things honestly is obviously the ideal way to go. And you can simply be honest about the fact that things didn't go as you expected. That's perfectly fine. But what we really want to focus on is not the negative part. Not, oh, this problem happened and then, no, 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 no. You can comment on it, of course. We can outline the problem, but where we really want to focus and emphasize is the positive part, the takeaways. All right? Now, we want to focus on, for example, how you reflected on that. Okay, so things didn't go as you wanted them to go. Unfortunate circumstances sometimes happen. All right, they happen to all of us. So what you want to do is basically look back and say, okay, well, this is how I've reflected on it, and this is what I learned. And what you learned is basically what you're going to do now. The better way in which you can handle this situation if it happens again. All right. And that's what the interviewer is really looking for over here. Okay? You can explain how you would have handled it differently with the new knowledge you have right now. So something happened back then, you weren't prepared for it, but now you can actually reflect back to that and say, you know what, I would have done that differently. Talk about that. that is a very good point to talk about. So, when you do have to talk about something negative, when you're asked about something negative that happened in the past, your interview, what do we really want to talk about? What we learned from it and how we can do it better. That is what the interviewer wants. They want to know, okay, well, they did something wrong. Okay, that's not a problem, but now they know how to deal with it better. Okay, so it's very important to not ramble and vent about the problem itself. Okay? They're not your therapist. We don't want to drag them into an emotional field or anything along those lines. If you are going to outline the problem, you probably should. But if you are going to outline that problem, by the way, there's one thing that you should probably not do: blame others. Okay? It can be someone else's fault, but if you are going to say that it was someone else's fault, say it in a way that doesn't seem like you're just, you don't really want to be responsible for it, okay? Because that can give a very, very terrible impression. So be careful with your language in these sections, with the English words that you choose, the phrases that you're choosing in these sections, because you can give off that impression, right? And the impression that we want to give off is that now we're going to handle things better, all right? So don't go out there blaming other people. Oh, you see, my colleague is an idiot. They did this and they did that. No, no, no. Just keep that for yourself. The interviewer does not need to know all of that. All right. So be selective with the information that you're giving, unless it is absolutely relevant. Then don't say it. All right. So remember that we're always looking for relevance. And when you do have to talk about a past deadline that you missed, we can basically change the spotlight. You're going to see this pattern on this live stream, right? When we're looking at interview preparation, there's a pattern in which sometimes negative related questions are thrown at you. And what we do is we flip the situation. We're going to focus on the positive things because you want to leave that interview feeling good and knowing that you left a good impression, not the opposite, right? You don't want to sit there worried, oh my God, I think I talked too much about that thing they asked. That's not really nice, is it? Okay, so remember that it is really, really important. Along the same lines, some people get asked to share an example of working with someone who is difficult. All right? Someone who is not easy to handle, basically, and how you handled dealing with that person. So this is a very specific question. It comes up usually when there is someone difficult to handle on the team that you're going to be working with. Otherwise, this question might not be very relevant unless you're dealing with clients. All right. So this question does show up. Many of my students actually got asked this question on their interviews. So let's see, my students, by the way, most of them work as computer engineers. So if you need to, well, if you did deal with a difficult person, how did you handle it? That would be the question, let's say, distilled, all right? Now, we want to focus on our communication skills, yeah? We want to focus on our communication skills over here. Explain how you communicated your ideas clearly to them, ensuring that you did not miss anything out. All right. So you want to put your communication skills under the beautiful spotlight. Now, the thing here is that, especially if you're at meetings or you're talking to many people, not just one person, but many people, you're going to have to develop that skill anyways, right? Because you might be sitting in front of 20 people, and these 20 people, well, everyone has their different interpretations and they can understand you the way they want to understand you according to their level of intelligence. So, you're going to have to practice your communication skills. This is what I want to say, and this is how I'm going to transmit it, right? This is something that we practice a lot in English. When you're actually doing solo practice, look for alternative ways to say things. Be prepared to explain yourself. Be prepared to elaborate. Be prepared to say something and paraphrase it just for the sake of emphasis, for example. So be prepared to run those drills if you do run a regular speaking practice routine. Um, if you have a routine, be prepared to do those things. They're really beneficial, even for jobs. We recommend them a lot for exam preparation, but they're super useful for jobs too. All right. So we're focusing on our communication skills and obviously the fact that you have some level of empathy or sympathy. That is also a very important thing to touch on. So if someone is having a bad day and they're a little bit cranky, you're going to want to also be patient with that person and know how to handle them. All right. So it doesn't have to be a difficult person in itself. Now, what you really want to focus on when answering this question is discuss the common ground you reached and what you learned from it, if you learn anything from it. All right? Because many times at work, we have arguments, we have debates, and someone has an opinion, the other person doesn't agree with them, have a completely different opinion, and you've got two different opinions here. We need to reach a common ground. All right? So, what you want to show the interviewer is your willingness to reach a common ground. It's great to stand your ground when necessary, right? It's great to defend your opinions, to defend your thoughts, and all of that stuff. But sometimes it is necessary to sacrifice a little bit so that both of us can reach a common ground and keep the work going. Because that's the most important thing for the company, really. All right. The most important thing is, despite the fact that you might have arguments with your colleagues, there might be misunderstandings and whatnot, the work has to keep going, the work has to be done, right? So if you can show that on the day of your interview, show that you are willing to reach a common ground, show that your communication skills are good, show that you can explain yourself, show that you can elaborate, show that you can back up your reasons, show that you've got communication skills in general, right? That is a very good point, right? Because the most important thing for the interviewer is to see that you're not just going to be a stubborn human being who is not going to be very easy to deal with. All right. So that is an important point to just keep in mind. Now, following the negative flow, another question that actually gets asked quite commonly is, why do you want to leave your current position? If you are currently working, this is a question that you might as well prepare for because they like to know. All right. Mainly, they're not just out of curiosity. If an interviewer asks you this question, they want to know why you're leaving your current job to see if you're going to do the same to them in the future. Okay? So be aware of that because they're thinking a lot. They're just thinking ahead. They're just thinking, so if I hire you for this 2-year project, are you going to leave me stranded at some point? That's basically what they're asking implicitly. All right. So what we're going to do here is we're going to flip the question again. We're going to talk about the good things about working in your current place, right? So don't use this as an opportunity to vent to the interviewer and tell him, oh, my job is terrible, this and that is happening, and we can save that for family and friends, okay? Now, what we want to do is flip the question so that we can talk about the positives because the interviewer also wants to know that you're not going to be speaking badly of the company when you leave the company if you do leave the company one day. That is also very important because of the brand image and its reputation. All right? So be careful because many people could mess this up very, very, very badly, okay? We talk about the good things about our current company. All right. But that's not what we want to focus on, obviously, because that would just be dodging the question. What we want to focus on are the highlights of development. Okay. So, what you don't want to say to the interviewer is, I want a better salary. That's what I want. Yes, it's an honest answer. Everyone wants a raise, right? But let's just narrow it down and actually add something more valuable to this answer. So, what we can talk about when an interviewer asks you why you're leaving your current position is the fact that you want a new challenge. You want to develop your skill set in a certain area in which you cannot develop it in your current job, right? So let's say, for example, you are currently working um, with something and it's getting a little bit outdated, but that's just basically where you're working. Technology is obviously moving on, it's progressing. You want to keep yourself posted and you want to learn all of those new things, but you don't have that opportunity at your current position. That is something fantastic to talk about when answering this question. Okay? So remember to always look back and say, all right, well, obviously, other than the obvious reasons, we all want better working conditions, we all want a nicer shift, something lighter, we all want better salaries, etc. We also want to draw out um, the part where we can just say that we really are looking for development, whether it's your skill set, whether it's a personal development, whether it's simply the fact that you are pursuing a different career path, which is also relevant, right? So what we're looking for is something along the lines of, I want to develop in this area, and over here I can't, and this job will help me do so. That's what we want to answer. All right, that's what we want your answer to sound like. So in this case, what we're going to discuss is the importance of your growth and improvement with new challenges that are not currently available at your job. Okay, so this is how we shift that question. Again, it is not an opportunity for you to bring out all the bad stuff about that company that you're currently working at. We're going to shift the focus and we're going to talk about growth and development, mainly so that the interviewer does not get a very bad impression of you. Okay? So that is a decent approach when it comes to this question. Now, when we are at an interview and we're talking about companies, they can ask you, why do you want to work for this company? Like, specifically this company. Why do you want to work for us? Now, in order to answer this question, unfortunately, it's a very common question. You want to show that you've actually done your research. Do your research before that interview, right? Even if you've applied for, let's say, 20 job positions, the day of your interview or the day before, just run a quick search to inform yourself about the company and what it does and all of that stuff. Okay, so it is a little bit important, yeah, because if you don't know anything at all about the company and you do get asked this question, you're not going to give the best impression, are you? So, why do you want to work for this company? What do we do when we get asked this question? You want to mention the things that you really like about the company, all right? So it is important that your answer is related to the position that you're going to basically get and how you align with it, all right? So not just about the company itself as a whole, we want to look back at our role, right? Look at my role and say, okay, well, this is what I'm going to be doing at your company, and this is what I like about it. That is what we talk about. That is what you can ramble about when you get asked this question. Obviously, the more excited and passionate you are, the better. But the most important thing here is to relate it back to your actual role at that company. Because if the company is doing something fantastic, but you're not really taking part of it, you can obviously mention that those things are really great, but it is also important that that's probably not the reason why you're going to be working at that company, is it? Because your role is something different. Okay? So, what we want to highlight are the relevant things. What I can relate to the position I'm applying for and what you like about that. All right? So that is what we talk about when we get asked why we want to work for that specific company. Okay. Now, two common questions, and I'd say that these are one of the most common questions that pop up on interviews: your strengths and your weaknesses. Let's start with our strengths. Um, so, what are the main strengths you'll bring to the company? That is usually how this question is phrased, but you can find it phrased in so many different ways. So, we want to talk about our main strengths again in relation to the role you're applying to. All right. This can be very hard for some people who are actually shifting their career. So maybe you've worked in something for the past 10 years and the job you're applying for has nothing to do with your job experience. That is when it gets a little bit more complicated, right? But in that case, you can highlight the skills that you're going to bring to the company, and they don't necessarily have to be skills that you developed in your previous jobs. Okay, so we want to highlight those strengths, and we want to always relate them to the role that we're going to have, okay, your position at that company. So talk about any experience and how those experiences developed over time. Okay, so let's say, for example, you have to work in a team, or you have to deal with clients, or you have to do something specific. You're going to look at that thing, which is basically your core role, right? You're going to look at that thing and say, okay, well, what skills do I need in order to actually be good at that? Let's say, for example, public speaking, communication, empathy, blah, blah, blah. We'll start to list these things, okay? And I'm talking about the preparation. You're not going to list them on the interview itself, okay? So you're going to drag them back, you're going to list these things, and you're going to see, okay, well, which ones can I relate to? Which ones am I really good at? And you're going to start looking at how you actually built those skills, how you built your skill set, and how your experience helped you build those skills. Basically, again, we're highlighting why we are the fantastic candidate for this role, all right, for this open position. Now, we want to focus and word things in a way that shares how you think your strengths will directly benefit the company or the project that you're going to be working for. All right. So we're not just saying, oh, I'm good at this and I'm good at that. No, we want to keep it closely related to what will benefit the company or that project that you're going to be on. Okay. Or the team or whatever you're going to go into. So we always look for their benefit, and we're going to walk backwards and say, okay, well, this is what I have and this is what they want, and we're going to bridge them. And this is the area that we really want to put the spotlight on. All right. So can you talk about other strengths? Of course you can, but the ones that you highlight are the ones that are relevant to your position, well, your future position. All right. Those are the ones that we highlight because, especially with people who have lots of work experience, you want to actually be able to filter that, maybe distill it a little bit and say, okay, well, this is what is relevant to what I'm doing right now, right? By the way, you can also talk about studies here, right? You have done a course, maybe a master's degree, or attended something, you've got some kind of certification or achievement, you can also talk about it in this section, which is fantastic. Just make sure that it is related to your role. All right, that's the most important thing. You can start seeing the pattern here, right? You see the pattern of you need to benefit the company. You need to be a valuable candidate for that job that you are applying to. And what we want to do is basically bridge them. This is why relevance is the most important thing. Okay, I'm going to say something else and I forgot. Let's talk about our weaknesses. What if, usually, they ask you about your weaknesses and how you improve them, or how you would improve them if you're not currently doing so? All right, so obviously, we want to be honest, but sometimes not brutally honest about our weaknesses. Okay. Now, And you obviously don't want to fall under cliche responses. Yes, there are cliche responses like, I work too hard. Mm, it's a little bit cringy. And I'd say that it would have worked very, very well a couple of years ago, but nowadays it's being overused. So find yourself a better excuse. Look at your weaknesses, but ensure that your weakness is not a core skill of the role. Okay? So take some time and say, okay, what am I actually bad at? What am I not good at doing? Let's say I'm not good at public speaking. I'm not good at working in a team. I'm not good at whatever it is. Make that little list and look at your role and say, what does my role need? Make sure that you do not mention the ones that are directly related to your role. Okay? So this is why we plan an interview in advance, to be strategic, to know exactly what we want to say so that you don't end up saying things that might not give a very good impression or might just blow the interview altogether. All right. So that is the whole point of prepping for an interview in advance. Do you have to memorize everything? Of course not. But at least have a clear vision of what you actually want to say and what you want to leave out when you get asked certain questions. That's basically the whole point. And practice your English, practice your business English, practice practice sentence structures, and practice transmitting the exact information that you want to transmit, because that's the hardest thing to do with a language. All of us have thoughts, but not all of us have the exact vocabulary set to use, right? So you might want to say it, for example, in basic English. But if you use a little bit of a more advanced expression, for example, it will give more detail. It will be more valuable in your speech. So you want to pick and choose what you actually do want to say at your interview. This is the whole point. When you actually sit down and you say, okay, well, these are my weaknesses, but I want to talk about these ones because they're not necessarily relevant when it comes to my role. They're not going to affect my role, which is the most important thing, right? The good thing about this is that when we do talk about our weaknesses and the bad things that might have happened in the past, we can also draw something positive from them. Either the fact that you are actively trying to work on them and improve, that's a good point to mention, right? Or something that you've learned from them. So something eye-opening. So remember to always have that lens when we're looking at these questions where some negative things can show up, right? When you talk about our weaknesses and say, okay, well, you don't just want to list your weaknesses, say, okay, well, this is what I'm bad at. But we could say, well, look, this is what I don't do very well, but I am working on it and I'm doing this to improve. Fantastic answer. Okay. Now, obviously, that weakness can be a skill or it can be related to the language, for example. Many people who are looking for jobs in English don't are not very comfortable with English in itself. So the most important thing, you don't have to be perfect. I mean, nobody's perfect, but the most important thing is to show that you are determined enough to actually work on those weaknesses and improve them for the sake of being a better candidate and being basically a better employee at that company. Yeah. Just make sure that you don't mention the things that are tightly related to your role when it comes to your weaknesses. And when you finally have these things, what you can do is pick and choose or English phrases or English structures that will help you emphasize the things that you want to emphasize and help you manage all of this information that you want to transmit and how to transmit it properly. But this is why we start with the interview preparation, the strategic part, so that you know exactly what you want to say. And then we look at how do we say this, but not the opposite way around. All right. Otherwise, it will just be way too wide for you to work with. So remember to go through this, go through the thought process. Obviously, it takes a little bit of time, but if you really care about the interview, you will probably put in that time anyways. So make sure that you look at it from a strategic sense, and then weave in the English and make it work in your favor. Remember that English is a tool. Languages in general, they're a tool in which you can use, well, a tool you can use, um, basically to get the outcome you want to get. And this is the most important thing when it comes to interviews, okay? The outcome. Keep the outcome in mind. Now, we talked about our strengths and weaknesses. How about pressure? We go back to problems. Now, this is also one of the frequent questions that people get asked. How do you deal with pressure or stressful situations? When you get asked this question, you are usually applying to work at a competitive company. All right? A lenient company will probably not ask you that question. Now, so you can get an idea of actually how the work is going to look like. So, what do you do in these situations in which you are under pressure, or situations which are quite stressful? You want to share an instance when you remained calm despite all the turmoil, if that instance exists, okay? If you look back at your past and say, okay, well, hey, there was a problem that happened in one of my previous jobs and I actually handled it quite well. Talk about that, all right? Now, you can also discuss how it's been a continuous journey of improvement, all right? So we can talk about how we have improved managing our stress and managing pressure over time, okay? Talk about how you've learned that with every new experience. So when there are experiences that actually taught you about how to manage these situations, take those experiences and talk about those ones, all right? So if you already have a strategic plan in place for when things get stressful or when the pressure is too much, you can obviously talk about that. Many times people don't have a plan in place and they just unfortunately get thrown into these situations. And that is the way we'd go with this question. Okay, so again, what the interviewer is looking for over here is how you will handle these situations in the best way possible. Okay, doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to work and it has to get the work done too. Okay, so we don't want to be stagnant there. So remember to always put yourself in the mind of the interviewer too when you're preparing for an interview. Why is the interviewer even asking you this question? Is it because he's genuinely interested in your stress? Probably not. Um, interested in knowing how you handle these situations to see if you actually fit the dynamics of the team that you're going to be working on or the role that you're applying for. All right. So again, it all falls under these this skill set that they're looking for. Similar question is to talk about the hardest problem you've ever tackled. Now, when you talk about this, and remember that we're talking about the hardest, okay? So we're actually talking about quite an unpleasant situation here. Explain the caliber of the problem and its importance. That is the most important thing here, because why was this problem really the hardest problem you've ever had to tackle? We're looking at the dimension. We're looking at how huge this problem is, how important it was, and what it was all about, okay? So we're going to explain that a little bit, but again, most importantly, what we want to focus on isn't the problem itself. Of course, you have to explain the problem, right? But the focus and the emphasis is going to be on what comes afterwards. It's how you approached it, even though it was difficult, how you approached that problem, or how you solved it, the impact that your solution had, for example, on that problem, how you helped solve that problem, or make it smaller at least. All right, so that is where we want to, again, put the spotlight. Is it the problem itself? No. You might want to mention the problem. Obviously, you're going to have to talk about the problem, how big it was, how important it was to solve that problem, and why it was the hardest problem you had to tackle. But The most important thing is to flip it again and look at the solutions. What was your input when it came to that problem, when that happened? Did you just sit back and hope that someone will fix it? Don't say that on the interview. If you actually did that, don't say that. But you see where this is going, right? That's what the interviewer is looking for. What did you do to help when something catastrophic happened? Okay, so if you are actually going to be able to play a role in troubleshooting, in offering solutions, suggestions, maybe giving advice, being active and engaged, right? So working in a team usually is also goes into that, right? So this is where we want to focus on. Okay, now I'm going to throw you one last question. And this is a multitasking question. Obviously depends on your work field, although many jobs require multitasking nowadays. Now, last question. Well, actually second to last. Describe a situation where you had to handle multiple responsibilities. So we're looking at a role in which you have to actually do several different things. All right, so it's not just one thing, then the next, then the next. There are many things on your to-do list. You've got responsibilities, and you need to figure out how to manage your time to get everything done before the deadlines. Usually this question comes up for people who are applying to be project managers, okay? But it is applicable in other situations. So pure time management is what we're looking at over here. You want to describe how well prepared you are when it comes to organization, all right? Obviously not everyone is super organized, but the best light you can shine on it would be basically would help improve, well, the odds of your interview, right? Of you getting chosen. So you want to describe how you were organized and prepared in a situation, for example, if relevant, in a situation which you actually had several things to do, crammed together, and maybe you have a deadline or not, but again, we still have to manage several things, all right? So what do we actually want to discuss here? Is it like, okay, well, I wrote a to-do list on my piece of paper. That's probably not the way to go. You can talk about a to-do list if you want to. But what you want to focus on here are your multitasking techniques. Your techniques in order to organize and prioritize the responsibilities that you have. And by the way, if you are applying for a senior role, as in a boss or something along those lines, you can also talk about delegation here, all right? So it is important because number one, you do not want to delegate every single task you have, okay? But you also do not want to be the kind of person who is not able to delegate any task because they're so consumed, for example, in their perfectionism. They want things done exactly the way that they want them to be done, that they cannot let someone else help them. Okay, so remember to not cause chaos in that area because it is very important. So when you are talking about your techniques, delegation is one of them. Just make sure that you know how to talk about delegation if that is relevant. Okay, because it is an important thing. And it's an important thing that you'd be surprised, but not many people get that right. All right. So discuss the techniques that you use to actually prioritize your work and organize it. Do you, for example, break it up into tinier tasks? Do you delegate? Do you work with your colleagues so that you can get things done faster? Whatever is relevant, look for whatever is relevant to your role, to the environment you're going to be working in, and discuss techniques that will go under that organization category. That's what we're looking for right here, okay? Now, if if you can use a specific example from your past in which you have done things marvelously, do that. And you can obviously discuss the impact of that result, right? So you've done things so perfectly, and what did that lead to? All right. You can talk about how it led to, for example, well, meeting either you met the deadline, at least you weren't overboard. You met the deadline. Maybe tasks on all the time that you had for those tasks a little bit more lenient. There are many benefits when it comes to organization. You just need to figure out what is suitable in your case. And obviously, when you do look back, for any question that you get on the interview, when you do look back at your work experience, if there is something relevant and good that puts you in a nice light, to take from the past and actually mention, you don't have to talk about it in a lot of detail, but mention it, then that will obviously be a little bit of a bonus point because our experiences are unique. You will probably not have the exact same experience as someone else, right? So look for those unique things about your experience, the unique things you do to make basically what makes you a valuable candidate, what makes you a candidate that they would actually want to hire. Okay? So, whenever you're prepping for an interview, always remember two things. Relevance, whatever you say wants to be tightly connected to your role, the description that you've got, and the second thing is put yourself in the shoes of the interviewer. Why are they asking you these questions? Because the interviewer always is going to be looking for something. So if you know what the interview is looking for and what would be a red flag, then you can avoid those red flags and talk about other things. So you know how to shift situations so that you're prepared to do that, right? And once you know how, well, once you've actually got all of that figured out, because as you can see, this can get really, really different. It can vary so much from one person to another. But once you've figured out the answers to all of these questions, what you will do is start looking at your English level, and weave it in accordingly. Because now you know exactly how you want, well, what you want to talk about. Now we want to see the how we're going to express it. But the what has to come first, always, all right? If you've studied enough English grammar, you'll also know that. Now, the last question that they always end with is a question, basically, is whether you have questions for them. Now, there are many controversial opinions when it comes to this. Some people say, I know you shouldn't be asking too many questions, or some people say, yes, you should have prepared some kind of question to ask when they actually ask you. So this depends on you, but this is a nice time to reflect on whether you do have any serious questions that are not mentioned in the job description or the job post. So read the job post in detail, all right, before you come up with these questions. Because if the answer to your question is there, it just says that you did not read through the job post and you did not read it carefully, you did not care enough. All right. So sometimes we don't care enough, by the way. But if you are actually trying to get the job and land it, it's a good idea to just do the research behind it and read things carefully. So use this time wisely, yeah, because it's a great way to show that you've actually done your research and you've done the parts that you should do before an interview, whether it's research about the company, whether it's research about the conditions, about your role, about whatever it is. It's a nice time to show that you've actually done your research, but despite that research, you might have a question or two, which is perfectly fine. All right. Now, we want to reduce it to around, well, let's say under 5 questions would be the ideal number of questions. You don't want to have a huge, long list of questions. That's not really fantastic. All right. So make sure that your questions are obviously significant, but make sure that they're also precise. They're not just vague questions. All right. So they're things that you genuinely want to know and you want to use precise vocabulary in order to express that. All right. Obviously, when it comes to asking questions and when it comes to the whole interview itself, you want to do things politely and with respect. What does that mean? Neutral to formal English. Do not use slang. Okay. So neutral to formal English is where we're going to set our interview. All of these answers. Okay, so make sure that you know how to differentiate between formal English and informal English. And remember that we're not just stuck over here. You can talk neutrally. Just don't fall on the other side of the scale, okay? We want to be from the middle up, basically. Neutral to formal, just make sure that you know the differences between them. And the differences that are really, really impactful, those are the ones that you want to avoid or at least concentrate on, okay? So are contractions a really big deal? If you say I'm, for example, it's not a big deal on an interview. If it's just basically when it's written, it's more of a deal. But it's not really that big of a deal. Those are not the kinds of things that you should really be worrying about. It's your choice of vocabulary that we're looking at here. And obviously avoid slang in these situations. We're not going to talk about that in detail though. So what kind of vocabulary should you avoid? What actually differentiates formal English and what makes formal English respectful and professional as opposed to informal English? That's basically what we're looking into here because that's the impression that we want to give. And we also want to give the impression that we are credible, that we are people that they can rely on, right? That's the impression that you want to give when you actually show up for an interview, okay? So that's the kind of language that you should be looking to use in your interview. And if you are used to using lots of informal English and your English is weaved in slang, that is perfectly fine for real life. But if you want to land a serious interview, you might want to practice some alternatives. All right, just for the sake of it. So that is the first place to actually figure out. We want to. I'm gonna fall. We want to figure out several things. You want to figure out strategically the answers and the things that you actually want to talk about on the interview day. And then from there, we're going to start looking at our English. What is your current level of English? Or an intermediate level, more advanced level? What is your current level of English? How are we going to use our English to transmit all that information properly to the interviewer? Okay. It doesn't have to be all technical and super detailed and really fancy English, no, but it has to be properly done. Okay, that's the most important thing. And obviously, if your English shines on the interview because you have practiced and you've prepared for the interview beforehand, that will give you a bonus point because they can see that you know how to use the language well enough to work in English. Okay, that's also a very important point here. So it's not just about what's on your certificate, but it's also about how you transmit information, how you communicate ideas and communicate experiences to the interviewer with proper language. All right. And obviously, you're not going to communicate them the same way you are going to do so when you're talking to your friends and family about what happened at work, right? So you can see that there are many differences. We want to focus on those differences. Okay. If you really want to, and this again depends on your work field. If you really want to, let's say, get your English up a notch, what you can do is a little bit of vocabulary expansion in the fields that you want to talk about. Number one, you can learn a little bit of jargon related to your field. Jargon is basically the English that you use in specific fields or to talk about specific topics, right? So it's not general English. You can learn a little bit of jargon. That will actually be more beneficial for your technical interview if you have one. It's called a follow-up interview, by the way. That interview is usually not done with human resources. It's usually done with either a technician or a specialist or the project manager, for example. So someone you'll actually be working with usually does that interview. That's the second one. That's one thing. And I forgot what I was talking about. You see, this is what you don't want to do on an interview. Talk so much that you lose your thought chain. So the more concise you keep things, the better. And by the way, if you can just write down some bullet points on a piece of paper, which I should have done, for example, for this live stream, you can do that for your interview just to see, um, just to have a nice quick thing to refer back to when it comes when you feel like you're going blank. All right. So make sure that after you've actually figured out what you want to say, we want to figure out how to say it in English, and we want to keep it in the neutral to formal range. All right, so we're going to change our structures a little bit. Sometimes that's going to be necessary. For some people, it isn't. Depends on how you learned English and what you learned. All right, so if you want to take your English up a notch, what we can do is expand our vocabulary horizons, not just with jargon, but with phrasal verbs and expressions. Not the general phrasal verbs and expressions that we have in the English language, business English phrasal verbs and expressions, because yes, they exist. All right. Now, be careful when you're using normal phrasal verbs. You want to use them a little bit sparingly because when we look at English vocabulary in general, phrasal verbs and expressions fall under the informal category. But we do have phrasal verbs and expressions that belong to business English. So if those are relevant to your job, to the nature of the work that you're applying for, you can go ahead and learn a couple of them to make your English shine a little bit more, or simply to help you transmit information a little bit better, especially if your level is not really advanced. Okay? If you're struggling with fluency, if you're struggling formulating your sentences, some of that vocabulary can be useful. All right? So just know that they exist. If you don't know that they exist, know that they exist and that you can use them because that is really important. Okay. Now that we already talked about contractions, don't use a huge bunch of abbreviations and stay clear from exaggerating adjectives. Things like tons of, I've put in tons of work, for example. Don't say that. It's very informal. There are adjectives that we have in the English language that we simply use to exaggerate what we want to say. All right. If you have listened to English long enough, you will see that we like to exaggerate a lot of things. All right. Um, so make sure that if you do use them very sparingly or just reduce them a good lot. All right, if you do actually use these types of adjectives on a frequent basis. So all of this requires you to actually know what your English looks like, right? You see here, because it all depends on how you learned the English language, what you've learned more, and what you have been exposed to the most. If you have been exposed to more business English, work-related English, then your formal English is going to be a lot stronger than your informal English. Is that possible? Yes, it is. I have C1 students that want to learn informal English for their daily conversations because they are so good at formal English because they work in English. So remember that it depends on your environment. Whatever you are most exposed to, whatever you practice the most, is what's going to make your English. Right? That's basically how your English looks. So remember to always look back at that. Always look back and say, and obviously, this is mainly for people who are at a lower level of English. There isn't really a more important type of English, okay? Obviously, depends on your goals. But informal English is not bad. It is the English that we use on a daily basis. All right, and within informal English, there are many different types of English. We've got slang English, which is basically you've got street English, right? We've got profanity, we've got vulgar English, we've got different things going on there. Okay, but informal English, maybe excluding some things, is generally used on a daily basis. It's not bad English, okay? So it is important in order to simply communicate with people. We use tons of phrasal verbs. We use lots of adjectives to describe things and exaggerate them. We basically speak in a certain manner, right? But we don't speak that way when we are in our work environment. Obviously, it depends on your work environment because some people get along very well with their colleagues and their bosses and blah blah. So it again depends on your work environment. But if you've got a serious formal work environment, then obviously your English is going to have to change a little bit in those environments, okay? So remember that when you are learning English as a whole, level up with both. The most important thing is to know when to use one and when to use the other, not to just study one thing and know absolutely nothing about the other. You can focus less on the other, of course, because we all need something to focus on our journeys. But that doesn't mean that we're going to omit it altogether, because if you do omit it altogether, even if you don't want to speak that way, that's fine. But if you do omit it altogether, you're also omitting comprehension skills. When someone talks to you using slang English, you might not understand them, and that's not very good, is it? Okay, so you get to choose how your English sounds. Okay, whether it's more formal, more informal, whether it's laced with expressions and metaphors and all of that kind of stuff, or or even or even if it sounds if you have a specific accent or a dialect, those are things that you get to choose, which is fantastic. But it doesn't mean that you want to basically close your circle and say, nope, this is the only thing I'm doing here. It's good to keep our comprehension open so that you can understand people from different places speaking English, non-native speakers speaking English, accent familiarization, and also understand native speakers when they are using English in its more natural form. Okay, so this is just a small piece of advice for the people who think formal English is the good English and it's the most important type of English. It is important to use it at work, but usually we don't take it outside those environments. All right, we don't really take it outside our career as much as you might think. It just takes a lot of exposure to figure that out. So make sure that you actually spend time exposing yourself to the right things too. Okay, if you are super focused on formal English because you need to get that job interview, you can do that. All right, but make sure that your exposure is there too. Listen to job interviews. Listen to interviews with people. Listen to talks. TED Talks are fantastic to get your English down, specific areas, for example. So listen to things that will feed your English, your grammatical structures, your vocab, and all of that stuff. Very rich knowledge that you can actually get simply on YouTube or wherever. So listen to those things and they'll definitely improve your English in the direction you want to go. It's always important to have a goal to work towards so that you're not learning a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of that and you're missing out on something important, okay? But that goal should never confine you. It should never be just this and nothing else, okay? It's the focus. That's it. It's there to guide you so that you don't get lost and so that all of the work that you're putting in actually you can actually see it when you reflect. You can see that measurable progress. You can see how far you've gone and how much you've improved, which is a fantastic feeling when you're learning a language. It's already hard enough, isn't it? So remember to keep those things in mind when you prep for a job interview. Remember to look at your strategy first, what you do want to say, what you don't want to say, and how you want to say those things. And then we're going to start using English in your favor. But we don't do it the opposite way around. It might get a little bit messy. Okay? So that is my advice to you on job interviews. I'm going to leave you here today, and hopefully I will be back next Tuesday around 1 o'clock Spanish time zone. I should probably post my timetable somewhere. Yeah, I'll look into that. Anyways, I'll be doing that on my own time. And next time I'm here, what we will be looking into is, well, one of the lists that you actually requested before. And I think, it's not the list that you requested. I think what we had pending were the resources, English resources, and learning techniques. So we're probably going to get onto that next time. All right. Anyways, if you are prepping for a job interview, good luck with that. And and in the meantime, I'll see you guys on Tuesday. All right. Take care of yourselves and bye bye.